Eddie, great to see you. Um, let's just start on AJ. Boxing aside, just awful. How is he?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to catch up with him in person, over the next few days. Spoke to him a few times. As you'd imagine, it was such a terrible, horrific incident, and two people that were unbelievably close to him. Two guys that were full of energy, full of passion, full of commitment to AJ and his team as well. I mean, they were teammates, but they were also some of his best friends, So I think AJ, as we've seen in the past, on boxing related stuff, is always a kind of brave face guy. He's a very positive guy. This, of course, is very different to that. But, I know that he'll take his time and, he'll need his time physically and um, mentally, emotionally, spiritually before he makes a decision on his future. I do think he's going to want to return to boxing, but that'll be his decision when the time's right. It's certainly not a conversation that I'll be having with him anytime soon. The only conversation is, are you okay? And sometimes we find people will give that, facade of being okay, but obviously what happened to him is not normal, and it's heartbreaking for everybody involved. Particularly the families of Senior and Lats who were so incredibly loved. You've seen that from the response from everyone, and obviously, it'll take a long time for it to sink in for AJ and a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, to confirm, you expect AJ to take some considerable time away from the sport?
Yeah, I do. And, again, that's not a conversation that I think anyone's comfortable in having in terms of asking, what could be next or what he's thinking. That's something that has to come naturally. You need someone to have their time and to just be left alone, really, to get over, like I said, just the not just a terrible incident, but just one that you can never prepare for in life. You never ever want to see anybody in any kind of this situation. It's heartbreaking. And when the time is right, I believe he will, make his decision. You'll hear it from him. Sometimes you hear he said that and he said that. The future of Anthony Joshua will be told by Anthony Joshua, and that's the only voice you should listen to in that respect. And we'll give him his time to make that decision and to heal specifically in many different ways. But our thoughts are, of course, not just with the families of Cena and Lats, but with AJ as well. And we pray for him every day.
Look, you've looked after hundreds of fighters over the years, but look, it's no secret that you and AJ are very close. What has it been like over the last few weeks? Just a little insight into that, because I know you two are just so incredibly close.
Yeah, I think, like I said, there's no kind of manual to how this should be played out. It's just something that you never expect, you never would wish on anybody, and a lot of the times you don't really know what to do. On one hand, you want to give someone their time, and you'd really think that they probably wouldn't want to talk about it, and then on the other hand, you want to be there for them, and you want to be around them. So I think for a long period of time after, it was to leave him, with his family, and he, of course, suffered injuries in the crash as well. So he's got to get over those physically. But just the time is right. Like I said, I haven't seen him in person since the incident. I will be doing that over the next few days, and then from there, just be good to see him. You know, I think that's the best way to put it because at one stage when you're getting these reports and you don't know what's happening, especially in the minutes and hours after the incident, and you know boxing plays a very very back seat in all of this. As a mate, you just want to make sure he's okay, and that's everybody's priority that works with him, that cares for him. Everybody wants to make sure that he's okay, and obviously the family are as well looked after as can be during this tragic time.
It's always hard to put it back onto boxing. Um, during Christmas, Tyson Fury's announced his comeback. I'm sure I'm sure you're stunned by that.
Yeah, wasn't the biggest surprise to be fair, but you know.
Um, who do you expect him to face? Because you might have one or two in your camp who you wouldn't mind getting
Yeah, I
him up
don't know.
against.
I mean, look, I think obviously there was a lot of talk, you know, pre-Christmas about Fury and AJ, and that's taken a big back seat at the moment. So, you know, from our side, there's nothing really to talk about on that. But, you know, Tyson Fury seems to be returning to boxing, and it's an interesting one. You know, I guess on one hand, you want to prepare yourself for a challenge against an elite guy, and on the other hand, you're coming back after a long layoff. You maybe don't want too much of a taxing challenge, you know. So I know some of the names that are in the mix. You know, I'll leave that to Turki Al Sheikh and Tyson Fury to mention those guys. We've got guys that would be up for the challenge, but on the whole, great to see him back. You know, I mean, he's gone from not really posting on social media to every time I pick up my phone, there's a new Tyson Fury story. And, you know, boxing can save you at many different stages in your life. You know, I don't think he was at a stage in his life where he needed saving, but you could tell that boxing once saved him, probably many times, and actually now he looks happier than ever and full of life. You know, training, you know, even away from boxing, I think physical training is the greatest form of, you know, mental help that you can get in so many different situations. And I think Fury looks like he's buzzing at the moment. You know, he's over in Thailand, is it, or wherever he is? He's running every morning. He's inspiring me. You know, I look at it, I go, good on you. You know, we've had a lot to say over the years, but I love the fact that he's back in boxing. I think he's an incredible fighter. I think he's brilliant for the game. And he can be involved in some huge fights. And by the way, he's still in his prime. It's not like, I mean, he lost two very close fights to Alexander Usyk. It's not like, oh, he's finished now. So yeah, great to see him back. It'd be interesting to see who he faces. I think they're talking potentially, you know, around April time. And yeah, great to see him back in the sport.
How close were we? Because Turkey alluded to it, didn't he, a few months ago? I know it's all hypothetical now, but how close were we to AJ Fury
Look,
before this tragedy?
of course, it's the biggest fight in boxing, and you know we were having those deep conversations. AJ fought Jake Paul, but then you know at this point, who knows? You know, I think it's not even something to discuss um, publicly, and even with you know, and even with AJ. So really, what was discussed in the past is kind of irrelevant. Um, you know, the key will be if and when Anthony chooses to return to boxing. When he does that, or if he does that, we will then start to see what a roadmap looks at. But as I said, at the moment, those conversations are a long way away.
I'll rattle through. I've got loads I could ask you, but I know you're busy. Just a quickie. Thoughts on potentially Usyk fighting Wilder? Wilder's a lucky boy if he gets that, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know. Like Usyk, do you know, I was with Usyk in Saudi, and I said to him, "Deontay Wilder, yeah," and he was like, "Yes." I said, "That's interesting." Like, and he made a point. He said, "I want to fight all the people from my sort of generation." He said, and the three people who were the key fighters of my era, and I know there's some youngsters coming through, but you know, is AJ, Fury, and Wilder. These are the two biggest names. And you have to give an honourable mention to Daniel Dubois, by the way, because, you know, but he's beat him twice, right? So he's beaten Fury twice, he's beaten AJ twice, he's beaten Dubois twice. And I think he's thinking, I think Wilder on my resume would be would be nice. Um, Wilder's a big draw, you know, he's still, but for me, he's well past his best. And I don't see it as an overly competitive fight. But as always, in this crazy business we work in, if someone's ready to pay for it, it will happen. And you know, it might be one of those fights where at the moment when people are talking about it, me included, might go, But then when you see it on the poster, you go, wow, you know, what if? But, for me, Usyk's a phenomenon. I mean, I saw him in Saudi. Looks fantastic. He's a specimen. And mentally, he's so strong, you know. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what's next for Usyk. What did he say? He's got 2 or 3 fights left. Great. More good news for boxing.
I'll rattle through this 'cause I know you've got to go, but I just want to get your answers on this one. You got Leo Atang, really exciting for you. And then a question we've had here: could we see Katie Taylor in the ring against Ronda Rousey? And then finally, a word on Dalton Smith.
Yeah, so Leo Atang, when we just talked there about AJ, Fury, Usyk, you got this new wave coming through, particularly Moses Talma. And then probably 2 years behind him is Leo Atang. I think this kid 3-0 now, 3 knockouts, hasn't gone past the first round yet, but he is, in my opinion, the future of heavyweight boxing, and I rate Atama, and I think that these guys are going to lock horns over the next few years in some big world championship fights. But Leo reminds me so much of Anthony, in his professionalism, his physique and his stature, his speed, his combination punching, and the way that he can interact with people, not just fans, but people. He lights up a room with his smile, like Anthony, and it's a long way to go. He's a young man, 19 years of age, but the future is bright, and he'll be back out January 24th in Newcastle. Katie Taylor against Ronda Rousey. I don't really see the legs in it, if I'm honest. I mean, Ronda Rousey's an incredible MMA fighter, WWE, boxing. I don't think it's really that competitive. But again, in the world that we live in, AJ against Jake Paul wasn't really that competitive. So, and it did extremely well. So, I think really, again, when we talk about fighting again, Katie has got to make her decision. Will she fight again? And there is probably a good chance she might not. There's also a chance she might, but she's done so much, and I think it's going to take something very special to make her fight again. So we'll see. And in terms of Dalton Smith, just one of the greatest nights I've ever witnessed. I mean, we lose the purse bid. We're the away fighter. When you talk about away days, this was like going up to Macclesfield when it's absolutely torrential rain, right? And there's a replacement bus service. We couldn't even get a direct train. It was like you talk about the odds being against you. This was it, and we all said fair dues. This guy, crazy guy involved, wants to stick up this kind of money. We'll go. We go to Brooklyn. The whole thing's based on Puerto Rican pride and all this kind of stuff. We're well in the lion's den. And what Dalton Smith did was produce one of the great performances from a British fighter on away soil. I'm talking John H. Tracy. I'm talking Lloyd Hunnigan against Donald Curry. Kell Brook against Sean Porter. This was an absolutely historic performance, not just because he won the world championship in Brooklyn after champion, but the way that he did it. He stood and he went to war with the monster, and he beat him at his own game. And Dalton Smith should be a hero in this country for sports fans, fight fans, everybody. And he'll be returning home for a big fight in the summer. And that should always eternally go down as one of the greatest wins from a British fighter. And I was so proud. It was honestly probably my best away day I've ever experienced. And that's up there with Kell. That's up there with Barker against Gill, which was, so historic. Taylor Serrano, so many great away days. But when your back's against the wall and you put it out the bag, it's very, very special.